Hey, thanks for having me. And Jan Hendrik, that was such a great way to open a Friday morning in Cape Town, or virtually wherever the hell you are. Um, sure. Okay, so I'm going to dive in and talk to you about stress. So I am intimately and personally acquainted with stress. It has made me who I am, but it's also made me sick and angry and aggressive and all the bad things that come along with it. So today, what I decided I was going to do is talk to you about a few stories of mine that involve stress, anxiety, and panic, as well as things that benefit from stress. And oddly, this is probably the most stressed I've been for a virtual talk in ages, and mainly because the topic is so universal and so personal, and so intimate for so many of us. And it has been, as mentioned, part of my journey from a very, very young age. And to illustrate that, I want to tell you a little bit about who I am. So I taught myself to code at 11, and I started my first business at 16. I've played in a band that didn't really work out. I've built a few social networks that also didn't work out. I have many, many, many failures under my belt that attribute my experience of the world as well as my lack of hair, which I will prove to you. That is what I looked like prior to starting my, I don't know, seventh business, fifth business, I don't know. And then that is what I looked like post starting that business. Stress genuinely did lead me to lose my hair. Stress, anxiety, and panic. That is no joke. I have sold three companies and exited a fourth this year. I've published two books and I'm working on my third. I'm obsessively building businesses and have invested in companies over the last decade. So fortunately, I'm not going to force you to look at my photo for the rest of the time. But I am going to start by talking to you about stress, anxiety, and panic. So as I've mentioned, when I was a kid, I just pushed into doing a lot of things. This comes from having a Greek mom who probably for the all of my teens believed and helped me believe that when I woke up, the sun rose. That is a lot of stress to be under when you are 7, 8, 9, 10. And my mother goes to great pains to tell people that I was walking and talking younger than all the other children at my age, and that I was bilingual, younger than all the other children. And that kind of reaffirmation is good because it provides ambition to my existence and self-worth, but it also just piles on the stress from a very young age. Then when I was 13, I was this kid. I was the kid who sat down and told my parents that they should get a divorce because they were stressing me out, because they fought constantly and they didn't belong together. They did not do that. If you've heard me talk before, I have mentioned this story numerous times. They decided to tell me that they were getting divorced the night before my prelims in matric. So if you want to talk about stress, that was me. That was my first experience of caving into stress. I went to my prelims on that Monday after on Sunday having been told that my parents were getting divorced, and I put my pen down on the table and I didn't write a single word in any of my prelims. I failed them back to back to back, prelim after prelim, and I thought, screw you parents, I'm going to show you how stressed and anxious I am, and I'm going to fail. And I did. I failed my prelims, and luckily my headmaster gave me an average and helped me get to the end of the year and pass. And then the more of these things that we don't recognize stress gives us. So when I entered grade 8, for whatever reason, teachers and other students kind of got to know me and then started saying to me, oh yeah, you're probably going to be head prefect when you get to matric. Now, when you are 13 and 14, how do you internalize that kind of comment? Like how does it fit in your brain? And for me, it really didn't. It just fueled this reliance on stress, anxiety, and panic. And I actually did end up becoming head prefect, which was the worst year of my life, playing first team rugby and Gauteng and getting a cracked collarbone and all these things that just pile onto a completely ill-equipped 18-year-old who's running a school. It was the worst thing ever. And that kind of set the benchmark for what stress is. And then I really leaned into stress when I started my first real businesses at Varsity, and then raising my first angel funding for one of my businesses, which I then gave back 3 days later. And that was like the beginning of me losing my hair and getting the experience of stress and anxiety that is mine. And we all experience stress and anxiety and panic in different ways. I eat stress all the time. I love it. I thrive on it. It's what drives me. It's what pushes me. But my body physically hates me and stress. I get so anxious and stressed that my body responds because my brain doesn't, and I've learned how to work through it. So what happens to me is I get sick. In the past 15 years of building things, I have had kidney stones twice. I've had insomnia on and off. I've had migraines. I've had a stomach ulcer rupture and hospitalize me. And because of my ego and my imposter syndrome, I didn't call anyone when my stomach ulcer ruptured, and I drove myself to the hospital. Fortunately, my partner flew down from Joburg and prevented them from giving me surgery. So these things are all intimately tied. And that's kind of the point of this, is all the things I'm going to talk about in the rest of this lead to one another. They're this flywheel of anxiety and ambition and self-worth and output and performance. And all of these incredible things, these are all the things that I think are tied and have led me to where I am right now. And so I eventually decided to deal with my anxiety and stress and panic by going to a therapist. And this is something I talk very liberally about because I think that South Africans don't deal with mental health, especially South African males. We believe that mental health is not our problem. We believe we can fix our own brains, and I've learned that we cannot. So I eventually went to find a psychologist and luckily found a really good one. And for the first session, I interviewed him, as a typical type A would do. I spent 40 minutes interviewing my psychologist to make sure that he was the perfect person for me. And 40 minutes in, he looked at me and said, "Are you fucking done yet?" And I knew he was right for me. And within a couple of sessions, he had immediately picked up that I have some very severe dependencies on stress, anxiety, and panic. And that's a weird way to phrase that. In session 2, he said to me, "Nick, do you realize that you are addicted to anxiety?" And it completely shattered my worldview. I had never considered that I was addicted to anxiety. I thought that anxiety was a response to things that were external from me. And in my case, it wasn't true. So I'm just going to read something that I've struggled to put in my brain permanently, but this is what happens to your brain when you are anxious. It leads to a phenomenon called overgeneralization, which in effect changes your brain's actual structure, physiological alteration known as brain plasticity. And look, some of these alterations can be good and some can be bad depending on the person. Some are positive, some are negative. For me, it was initially very positive because it helped me work better, and in the end very negative. As an example of positive brain plasticity, in stroke victims, they can actually regain some or all of their previous brain function because of anxiety and what brain plasticity does. For me, however, it would raise my dopamine levels, it would help me overgeneralize, and it would help me work better. So what I was doing was manufacturing things to be anxious about so that I could get to that level of stress that would hit me with dopamine, focus me in, and help my brain get better at what it was doing. And that became a vicious cycle. If there was nothing for me to be anxious about, I would create anxiety, and then I would work at a better pace, and then on and on and on and on and on. So I had to figure out how to deal with this anxiety, and it's taken me years and years of help to figure out how to lower all of this stress, panic, and anxiety. The anxiety for me often leads to panic, and panic leads me to more stress and more anxiety, which leads me to worse work. And that last part is the key thing that I've come to understand outside of my 20s. My 20s was just focused on aggression, panic, stress, growth, ambition, bigger, better, faster, harder. And as I hit 30, I started to deal with my physical manifestation of the stress. And now that I'm 36, I've coined this phrase for my life that I'm hoping is relevant to you. I call it the sacrifice fallacy. The sacrifice fallacy for me, it's the fallacy that you have to sacrifice your mental and physical health to build anything of value. And we've, for the last decade, been surrounded by this culture. And I mean, I'm going to mention it later on, but this culture of what I've read somewhere called hustle porn, that, you work 18 hours a day, you don't train, you don't eat, you don't sleep, all you do is work, and that makes you a better person. I'm here to call bullshit on that. The sacrifice fallacy tells you that that is not true. What we do as humans is we prioritize ourselves at the bottom of our priority list, when in fact, if we put ourselves at the top of our priority lists and we do the following 3 things that have helped me manage my stress. You sleep properly, 8 hours a day. 8 hours, folks. 8 hours a day is so key. You eat properly and you exercise. If you do those 3 things and you do them first and you put yourself at the top of the priority list, then everything else becomes easier. Then people want to work with you and around you. If you don't sleep, you don't eat properly, and you don't train, you become an asshole. And you might think you're the exception, but look me in the eyes when I say this, you are not. People who do not eat, do not sleep, and do not exercise are not nice humans. Sleeping 8 hours is the best medicine you could possibly give yourself. And it's incredible to me how long I ignored that because I wanted to prove to the world that I was working harder than everyone else. The thing that I want to impart on, and I hate saying this, but it is often men, self-care is not selfish. It is okay to put yourself first. That is not selfish. You're operating at a higher function if you put yourself first, especially in this pandemic, especially in a time where stress is so rife. So that's my preachy sacrifice fallacy. Please remember that phrase. You do not have to sacrifice your mental and physical well-being to be good at what you do. That is just not true. So the thing that I realized very shortly after that is my ambition and my self-worth were often pegged to the businesses I was building as well as my outputs. And that becomes a very, very vicious flywheel that if you don't work 18 hours a day, then your self-worth goes down, then your output needs to go up because your self-worth is pegged to your business success and the amount of work you do. It's taken me many years to understand that my self-worth cannot be pegged to my business, how many emails I reply to, how much work I can get out in a day. And it's so detrimental to my actual end result if I think that my self-worth equals how much work I do. And we're all in that. I mean, for the first 4 months of this year, I put an out-of-office response on my email permanently that said, hey, email's not my job. I'm working, I'm reading, I'm researching, I'm walking, I'm talking, I'm not answering email. Because for me, email is someone else's to-do list for my day. And I just can't deal with that level of anxiety and stress. So tied to all of this is the ambition that I've had from a very young age. I realized that in my 20s, the ambition that I was striving towards, the things that I wanted, the way that I defined success, were all external. They were all someone else's version of what that meant. There is no course when you're a kid teaching you how you should define success and what success looks like. And I am stunned at how long it took me to go, hold on, what are my success triggers? What is my version of success? What does a very good and very happy and very pleasant life look like? Is it a company with 300 people that does $10 billion turnover and is international and makes me work 20 hours a day? Or is it having the freedom to choose what I want to work on, when I want to work on it, and where I want to work from? And then work towards that. So I spent 15 years making other people's ambitions mine and then stressing out when I wasn't reaching their version of what success looks like. So now all I do every single day is reassess what is success for me. Is what I'm doing helping me feel that way? Is my self-worth pegged to the work that I'm doing, or am I doing the work because I like the work? Those things are very difficult to unpack. They're so closely tied together, especially in the world we live in, where we are always on, where everything is coming at us so quickly. Earlier on, there was mentioned that a quote, a lady, I forget her name, that you stress about things you care about. I actually don't know if that is entirely true anymore. We stress about what other people are doing on social media. We stress about what our colleagues are doing when they're working. We don't care about those things. We are tricked into caring about those things because social media is always on. So I'm not sure if we only stress about the things we care about. So this all for me ties to performance. failure and ego. I don't think you can talk about stress without talking about ego. I have had to do a lot of hard work on the ego that I had in my 20s versus the ego that I want to have in the rest of my life. And the ego in my 20s was about external validation, about getting into the media, about selling a business. It wasn't about how much I enjoy what I do. And one thing I am very happy about and proud of is my relationship with failure. And I think everyone's relationships with failure lead them to be more stressed and more panicked and more anxious. My relationship with failure is very good. I strive to fail because failure is where I learn. I don't believe that success is the avoidance of failure. I think success is the seeking of failure, overcoming of failure, and learning from failure. In my podcast, I have interviewed some of the most incredible people in the world, the founder of Starbucks, Electronic Arts, Moz.com, all these incredible people. And without fail, none of them talk about failure. They talk about what they've learned from failure. None of them bash failure. They all talk about working towards failure. And I think that as a culture, South Africans are very conservative about this idea of failure. And we're so stressed and panicked about failing that it leads to the rest of this anxiety that we have in our lives. And then we get panicked about failure, so we want to avoid it. And instead of striving for it, it makes us all these crazy things. So for me, I had to really figure out where my self-worth was pegged, because this year I exited my fourth business and decided not to start another one. And that sounds a little bit crazy to most people, but for me, that means that in 20 years, this year will be the first that I've not built a business. That is very hard to understand for my body and my life and my outcomes. The most difficult thing for me over the last 6 months has been not working. I even took Fridays off, and after 2 Fridays off, I decided that was bullshit because I needed to work and couldn't take Fridays off. That is how not used to working I am. So I've had to really figure out where my self-worth is derived, and it isn't from my businesses. It isn't from other people. I'm still not sure exactly where it is derived, and we can talk about that in the questions if you'd like. So on top of all of these things, one of the things that I talk a lot about is imposter syndrome. I've spoken about this a lot, and I prefer to use the phrase imposter phenomenon. Imposter syndrome, if you don't know what it is, the short version is, in spite of external validation, you don't believe that you belong where you are. And you know that feeling when you get into a meeting and you think, oh crap, if someone just scratches below the surface, they're going to find out I don't belong here. If you are listening and you're nodding your head, everybody feels that way. Everybody. Every meeting you walk into, the CEO feels like they might not belong. Even if they don't show it, she knows that she's feeling this feeling of imposter. It's crazy. And that kind of ties into the stress and anxiety of, oh my God, I don't feel like I belong where I am. I need to work harder. I need to hustle a bit more. I need to spend a little bit more time. The reason that I prefer to call it imposter phenomenon is because for most people, it's negative and it drags them down. For some people, that phenomenon pushes them to learn more, pushes them to be a little bit better. And there is a fine balance, because if you feel like you're an imposter and you work too much, you can have a negative effect on things like your self-worth, your anxiety, your stress. So moving to patience, this one is super important to me because that adds to my immediacy and the frequency of stress and anxiety. I am a very impatient person, if you haven't picked that up by the tone and speed at which I speak. And I've had to tie it into my ego management and everything else. One of the things that my psychologist said to me one day is, Nick, you can't brute force your way to where you want to go. Have you ever thought that waiting is an action? And that particular phrase completely broke the way that I saw everything that I did. I always saw waiting as passive. And he helped me understand that waiting is an action. And if you can consider that, then you have to realize that maybe you haven't hit your version of success yet because it's just not your turn. Maybe you just need to be more consistent and more patient and do the things that are coming your way, and things will work out. It was very hard for me in my 20s to figure that, because in my 20s, it was all about brute force. I'm going to push my way to this success. And when that doesn't work, what you're left with is stress, anxiety, and panic. And I mean, look, my companies have gone good and gone bad. The one where I lost my hair, had kidney stones and a stomach ulcer. I didn't pay myself a salary for 6 to 8 months in that business. It was sold behind my back, and it was a positive exit at the end. So the stress and anxiety was relevant and valid. But I have to wonder, was that stress and anxiety because I was impatient and because I was an imposter, or because the business wasn't going to work out? So in closing, I want to leave you with a particular piece of insight that I have discovered over the last 5 years of talking about stress and researching stress and anxiety, and it's post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is actually a real thing, and it does what it says on the tin. There is a lot of psychological research that has been done around the theory that any trauma that anyone experiences anywhere, and I count stress, anxiety, and panic as trauma, depending on how seriously you take it and how much it affects you. Any trauma you experience, post-traumatic growth implies that you will get better after that. And through many, many studies, they found that between, I think it is 60 to 80% of humans who experience a trauma will get better, no matter what that trauma is, no matter how hard, how harsh, how brutal and aggressive. Most people overcome that trauma and improve. And this ties very directly to me into failure. I see failure as a through point. Most people see it as an end point. If you can reframe failure as something that's a micro trauma in your life that you can look back on and learn from, then all this stress, all this anxiety, all this panic that we feel is par for the course. It will help us lower our idea of what stress and panic are if we understand two key things. Failure is not an end point. I like to tell people that the next thing you're going to try, ask yourself, if I do this and it fails, will it kill me? And I mean that literally. If it won't kill you, why not try? There might be some other issues. You might lose a lot of money, but you'll make that back. That, for me, stress and tying into post-traumatic growth means we should stress less about things, because the worst outcome means at a failure point that you will learn something and improve. So if you take nothing away from this talk, please go and Google post-traumatic growth, go and read a little bit more about it and try and apply it to your life. Look back on your own traumas, your own stresses and anxiety, and see if you've actually learned anything. This has been such a monumental shift for me, understanding that my self-worth isn't tied to my output. That's the first thing. That the second thing, failure is something you should learn from. And the third thing is, if you see failure as a trauma, then you will get better after failure because of post-traumatic growth. So that tying flywheel together has really helped me calm down and see life for what it is. Obviously, if you want to talk about it in the questions, I do a lot of other things on a daily basis that help me lower my stress and anxiety levels, which we can get into if you'd like. But for now, if the only thing you take away from this is failure is something you should work through, and post-traumatic growth will make you a better version of yourself. That is my intimate and personal bolding story of stress, anxiety, and panic. And I really do thank you for the 20 minutes that you gave me.